So once you have all of your cells linked to the tabs, you can see that the totals work. We have to do a little more math in our book here. So I'm going to call this cell totals. I'll call this one contingency. Give myself a subtotal line, and then okay. So for this next section of formulas, what we're going to do is, the totaling is pretty well simple. So if we go in here, we can use our sum function, and all of these totals just total the column above. So again, we can use our quick copy to drag that formula across by hovering down here on the bottom right. So contingencies are a percentage you can put on an estimate for unknowns. You can put that on the total. You could put it on, maybe you're not sure what kind of equipment you're going to need. Maybe there's a pending labor price increase. Maybe there's something wild going on with material. A few years ago, there was really big spikes in steel pricing. There was a lot of construction going on with China. They were buying up all the scrap they were producing here. When there's a lot of construction going on, it boosts the material prices. So it's a percentage factor. So I'll put this on here, and I'm going to just highlight these cells, right-click, format. I'm going to format them as a percentage, so just like in our waste factor, we don't have to figure out the decimal point for whatever the percent is. We can type 50 for 50% instead of 0.5. Click OK. Then I'm just going to start with I'll start with a 5% contingency across the board here, just so that we can see how the formulas work. So in some applications you will have, in bidding in industry, you may have multiple contingencies. You might have a design contingency. You might have a construction contingency. You might have something called an incidental cost. And we'll get into those in lecture in more detail, but sometimes there's a necessity to differentiate between design and construction contingency. At an early stage of design, you may carry a higher design contingency, but then by the time the drawings come out to bid, that might go to zero. But it's a renovation project, so you still want to show that you're carrying construction contingency in case you find any of the good kind of insulation, that starts with an A and rhymes with asbestos, or something like that in the walls. So you can add multiple contingency lines. For the purpose of this class here, you're not going to be doing the same estimate at schematic, design development, and construction document phase. So one contingency line is enough, and you could combine them into that one and just note that it's 20% contingency because you're carrying 10 and 10. Right, 10 for design, 10 for construction. So I like to show the amount that I'm carrying for contingency, just so that the owner can see it and I can see it. It gives you just a visual representation. You can say, all right, is 10% really enough? Or is 10% giving me $1,000 and you can't get a contractor to show up on site for $1,000? So maybe percentage-wise your number's good, but you really just have to boost that number up because it's such a small job. If that makes sense? So these are going to be pretty simple. they're just literally a amount of the contingency. So they're going to be your total times the percentage that's associated with it. If I change these to 10, it will make it easier to visualize. You'll see in a minute. And then I'm going to change these cells here. I'm going to format cells, and I'm going to make them no decimal places. So you can see I changed it to 10%. So when you look at 6750 here, it changed to 675. That makes sense. And then your total with contingency is going to be equal to your total added to your contingency. So my total with contingencies, you add those two cells together, and then this can be dragged all the way across. Again, these are all formatted as currency with 0 decimal places, and that gives it the nice dollar sign so you can tell what it is. Yes.
What two cells did you add together?
For these here, it's your total plus your contingency.
Okay.
So this would be the total with contingencies. So, 2,500 plus the 250, $2,750. And again, the reason I do that is if you look at equipment and you were seriously concerned about having the right equipment or things like that, $2,500 because you were renting whatever piece of equipment. If you look at this and let's say you were like, we'll just throw, you're carrying a 5% contingency, and 5% on $48,000 worth of materials. Oop, wrong cell. That gives you $2,000. That's substantial. You look over here, 5% on $2,500 is $125. That's not enough even if you're renting tools at Home Depot to go to the next size up. Does that make sense? So, maybe you're not sure kind of quite whatever piece of equipment, demolition hammer you're trying to use or how long you're going to need it. So you can look at the numbers and see what you may think for contingencies. It's kind of a gut feeling. Sometimes there are some guidelines you can go by. So in the next section of math here, got a couple things. We're going to have something called a direct cost, which is going to be your direct cost of construction, how much the actual project itself costs. Tax or sales tax, right? Every time we do something, we have to make a donation to the state. Tax changes. If it's a capital improvement project, maybe it's tax on material, or there might be tax only on temporary installations, but things that are permanently installed, there's only tax on material. It could be a tax exempt project. So we need to be able to account for tax in our number. Overhead. Profit, which is the reason we build anything.
What if you're non-for-profit organization?
Do you know of any non-for-profit construction companies?
No.
Other than poorly run ones? Intentionally not-for-profit construction companies, I should say. No, I'm not saying that to be belligerent. I don't know of any. I guess you could, but then your profit margin could just be 0. Or maybe you change that to a donation percentage, and you'll do the projects for free, but you require a donation. Okay, so these are all generally figured as a percentage. So I'm going to format these cells right here as a percentage. I might leave decimal places on these ones because sometimes it changes with localities with the tax or overhead profit. You might want to carry a 0.5% or discount by 0.5%. So tax rate, what's tax rate in New York? 8%. We'll say we have 5%, oh, just for the sake of numbers, 5% overhead, 10% profit. For overhead? If it's a massive job, yeah, and there are most jobs you laugh yourself silly if you get close to 10%. But it's a number to put in here so that you have a guideline and you can adjust that according to the project size. Same thing with the overhead. It really depends on the project. If it's a job where they're requiring P6 scheduling and BIM coordination and things like that, you're going to have extra engineers working on it. You're going to have a scheduler. You're going to have maybe a P6 consultant if you're a small enough company where you don't have anyone proficient in it. Same thing with the BIM. You'll have your, and the software licenses you'll tie to the project.
What's P6?
It's a scheduling software. It's an Oracle software, Primavera P6. It's like the premier scheduling software, but it's only used on certain projects because of its complexity and cost. But it's something to be aware of. If you're just a small company and you're working on it, all of a sudden you get a super job. You're working on some chip fab plant, and now all of a sudden you have to do BIM coordination. You might not have anyone on staff that can run BIM software, so you'll have to hire a consultant or pay a fee to the GC if they offer the services to coordinate for you, if it's in your contract. So things change your overhead profit. If it's a job right near your home location, your overhead might be lower. If you have to put up your employees in a hotel and pay them more mileage and per diem for meals, your overhead might be more. Does that make sense? So these are all kind of fluid. So I'm going to leave them really kind of how they are for now, just as placeholders. So as far as direct cost, it's really simple. It's just a carry down of your total here with contingency. Direct cost. Your sales tax is going to be equal to your percentage times your direct cost. You can see how big of a donation that is. Now, your overhead is going to be equal to your overhead percentage times your direct cost. The same formula. Can I just drag this down? Like this? Did that work?
No, because that's 5% of 8,000.
Right, exactly. This number here is now 5% of 8,000 whatever, and we want it. So you could drag it down, then you can move these rectangles around and do all sorts of fancy things like that. But it's a good opportunity to show you guys another function in Excel. If I double click here, this red cell here, this 105,600, my direct cost total, H12, I don't want that cell to move when I drag the formulas. So if I put dollar signs before what I don't want to move, so if you're shifting left and right, you'd put a dollar sign before the H. If you're shifting up and down, you put a dollar sign before the 12. We're dragging it down. I'm going to put a dollar sign before both just so that it alleviates any confusion. All right, and then you know you're all set. That locks that cell, so when I drag this down, you can see that the formula is working correctly. Now, if you look on my screen, you can see that this is showing up as number signs. And that's because my number is bigger than my cell width. So I'd have to double click here and make that fit. It's not an error. I'm going to save.